on today's Edge of Wonder. We welcome back Ben and Rob from the Psychology of Woke event where they got to talk with JSather and a few other familiar faces. We'll do a two-part sit-down with Jordan and talk about things like the Secret Space Program, otherwise known as the SSP. So if there is an SSP, why is it secret? What is its mission? And what on earth does this thing cost? Could this account for the missing trillions from Pentagon budgets? And what exactly is the relationship between the Secret Space Program and Military Industrial Complex, or MIC? Looks like we'll not only need the Millennium Falcon to get to the edge of this wonder, we're going to need Rob Solo, Ben Skywalker, and their furry friend and guest, Jordaka, as we depart for the Edge of Wonder.
Welcome to Edge of Wonder, guys. We're here with JSather. You all know him from all of his research on Q and all the great things he's been doing for the community. We're lucky to have him on the show today. Jordan, thanks a lot for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Ben.
Yeah, it's
Thanks, guys.
great having you. So just to kind of let everyone know what we were doing, we were at Psychology of Woke, also Waking the Collective.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of a small group of people that got together, and all of us talked during this weekend.
We actually talked in person.
In person.
For the first time.
All of us.
Yeah.
Not just on camera.
But ours was way better than yours.
Immensely better. Mine sucked. They got more laughs than I did. People were just like stone-faced.
But actually, what
No, he had shocking stuff that he was dropping.
really
It was
did,
really great.
and just the way you present is just so on point. You're just really, I just think you're an awesome presenter. So
Thanks, man.
really was good. But also Billy Carson was here.
Mm-hmm.
Dylan Lewis Monroe, who actually created the Q map.
The Q map.
The Deep State Mapping Project. Yeah. He's the graphic designer for that.
Yeah, and then Michael from Q&N, which is a new Twitter kind of Q.
Yeah, he's got his Instagram and Twitter feeds that he puts out a lot of info on.
Yeah, he's been doing great. He's only been going at it for a few months now, and I mean, he's having a huge effect, which is great. So yeah, QNN, the letters NN on Instagram. If you look those up, you'll find it pretty quickly.
And Busy Gold, she's the one who sponsored this whole event, and that she does booty yoga actually at her studio here in Phoenix, Arizona. So.
And the break method.
And the break method.
Yeah, she's got multiple avenues that she's going down, so she's a fireball.
Yeah, she really is. She's got her hands full. She's an awesome person.
And she's trying to create as much change as possible, so that's why she brought us here this weekend, and we were all at that wonderful event speaking, talking with, it was smaller, 30, 40 people I think were there.
Yeah.
But it was awesome. All of us being able to present. It was awesome meeting these guys and being able to actually get some work in and hang out with them for more than, I think this is the second time we met.
Yeah, second time we met.
Second time we met. We met at 11/11.
Oh yeah,
Disclosure Fest
Disclosure
event
Fest.
in DC, and that was cool being able to hang out with these guys. But there were so many people there and so much stuff going on that
We got to talk for like 2 minutes. Probably.
2 minutes. Yeah.
Seriously.
And let's go into something really cool that I know everybody out there would be dying to hear about, is the Secret Space Program.
What's that?
Yeah. It's a great question. What is that?
But if it's secret, how is it? I mean,
how do
we're
we know
talking
about
about it, right? The not so secret space program.
So it's really this kind of paradox.
Right, truly. Well, that's the point, right? The point is for us to talk about it and educate the public and let the world know about it so it doesn't become secret anymore. Because the thing is about these programs, these projects that are kept secret by corporations and by quasi-military groups. You can't really say corporations or the military because it's groups or individuals within corporations or military that keep it secret. But these people, these secret societies, they have control over these black projects, these secret projects, and there's so much money that goes into them. There's all sorts of technologies that they keep from the public, they suppress, and that they swipe right into these projects. So it's a necessary subject to discuss, and it is deep, and it is mind-blowing and so expansive. That's kind of a testament to the waking up process. A lot of people say, I've been red-pilled, or I'm woke, past tense, as if they did it and they're done, and they're a changed person. Nope, it's a never-ending process, right?
Yeah, of
it
course.
is never ending.
Never ending.
And because once you start really waking up, I mean,
The rabbit hole just gets deeper.
and then you start finding things that you're just like, oh my gosh.
Right, but hey, let me ask you a kind of more technical question about this, because you mentioned that these are funded projects, right? So how, in your opinion, because this is a big issue, the money that goes into these space programs would have to be in the trillions of dollars, billions and trillions of dollars, right? How do we as a group actually track that?
So that's a good question. First of all, it's never actually been tracked. So back in the 80s, there was a report that circulated around the Pentagon called the Spinney Report. And the Spinney Report came from a dude named Franklin Spinney. He was a budget analyst in the Pentagon, and he started going through these ledgers, and he started seeing that they didn't add up. They weren't adding up for him. So he started finding that there were billions of dollars wasted that he couldn't account for. And this Spinney Report, his superiors tried to hush it, but the report circulated around. It ended up on the desk of Senator Chuck Grassley, who's still in politics right now, funny enough, like 30, 40 years later. So it ended up on Chuck Grassley's desk, and he saw it, and he essentially forced this report out into the public domain. And Franklin Spinney testified in the Pentagon. He actually testified in the same room that they held the Watergate scandal.
Oh, wow.
So it was big. There was a lot of cameras there. Initially, his superiors were trying to just hush his testimony and do it in like a back office with no cameras and no media. But luckily, Chuck Grassley said, no, this is huge stuff, and pushed him into a much bigger room with the media there. So it ended up exploding into the public domain. I think Spinney ended up even on the cover of Time magazine for it. So this is when the idea of Pentagon waste, of waste within government budgets started, was back in the 80s. And then fast forward a couple of decades, we had, of course, Donald Rumsfeld the day before 9/11, $2.3 trillion unaccounted for, and the next day 2 planes took down 3 towers somehow, and everybody forgot about that. Fast forward another 15 years, in 2016, we had a report released from the Inspector General's office. So this is actual government report, you know, kind of shows you how there's good and bad people in the government trying to get secrets out. But this DoD IG report stated that the number of unaccounted for funds from the Army's budget was 6.5 trillion. So, you know, we're talking billions of dollars initially in the 70s and 80s that started getting taken out. It just grew and grew and grew to now. I mean, some estimates are as high as 10 trillion, 20 trillion of going both in and out of the Pentagon. So we can think of the Department of Defense budget as like this giant slush fund that's never been audited. They say that their excuse is we can't audit it because it's too big. There's too much manpower involved for that. So we can't do it. So that's been their excuse for decades not to do it. And there's just so much money that corporations and who knows what is using the DoD budget for. And then when you talk about the technologies that exist on this planet, well, when were they getting the technologies? Back in the 50s, 60s. Then they started to see, wow, this is what we can do with them. Then it makes sense in the 70s, 80s, they started taking as much money as they could to build it out.
Yeah.
But on a good note, you know, in 2018, last year, it was the very first time ever that the Pentagon had been audited. The first audit ever was completed last year.
Wow.
Of the Department of Defense. Now, it's funny that we have, you know, a new administration that's, a lot of people say it's fighting the deep state. Well, they audited the Pentagon, that's good news there. They've been very hush about their findings of the Pentagon audit, but I think, of course, that's not to scare the public, and they have to be very careful in how they disclose a lot of this stuff. So I think we're going to start seeing a lot of information trickle out to the public of, oh, money they found in these ledgers in these back corner offices of the Pentagon. And, you know, I think one report just came out last week where they said they found $27 billion in this account that was just sitting there and never used. So of course, 27 billion, that's a lot of money.
Dude, those.
I mean, yeah, just give me one of those billion. And
Right?
Well, I mean,
I'll do
that's
something good
the
with it.
most. And I mean, that's.
It's like $100 for every American there.
And that seriously is more money than most countries even have
Totally.
collectively.
Right.
In one account. Just
In one
hanging out
account.
there.
Just hanging out.
Insane.
And then, I mean, that's just a drop in the bucket compared to all the rest of the money that's been slush funded around.
Well,
So
also, I mean, you were saying in your speech the other day, like, you know, they found that they were spending like $15,000 for a toothbrush.
that's how they slush fund this money out. You know, when many of these corporations give their proposal to the government, they completely over exaggerate the cost of things. So if you've ever seen the movie Independence Day, right there, the original one with Will Smith.
I think,
Yeah. So the iconic scene when they take the president after the aliens invade, and they take the president to Area 51. The president's like, "This actually exists," and then his chief of staff in the movie says, "Yes, sir." You know, like you can see in the movie there, they're actually keeping the president out of the knowledge. You know, that's how a lot of these programs work. They're called unacknowledged special access programs because only the people in them know about them. Anybody outside of them, they don't hear a word. So anyway, in this movie, president, they take him down to Area 51 and he's looking around the labs. He's like, how do we fund all this stuff?
I don't understand. Where does all this come from? How do you get funding for something like this?
And then one of the supporting characters in that scene, he goes, "You don't really think they spend $40,000 on a toilet seat, do you?" Right there, truth in plain sight for the whole public to see. You know, what they do is they completely exaggerate the cost of basic stuff, and then the rest of that money is what gets funded into, you know, whether it's their bank accounts or their projects that they want to develop out. And speaking of, you know, disclosing a lot of this information, we had the first audit ever, which is good. We just mentioned that they have to be very careful in how they disclose a lot of this stuff because they can't shock the public. They have to be very tactical with bringing a lot of this info out. I did find it interesting that about 2 or 3 months ago, there was a report circulating around, it was in the mainstream news as well, of the Air Force spending $1,300 on coffee cups. Coffee cups.
Those coffee cups better have been made out of gold.
Gold,
Yes. I don't think they were.
No, they were like this.
Pretty much. Right, so, you know, bit by bit, drip by drip, I think there's good guys in levels of power within the government, corporations, etc., that are working to get all this info out very tactically. They're telling the public bit by bit that there's been a lot of money taken, this is how it's taken, and I think soon we're going to start seeing information come into the public domain about where it went.
Interesting.
We have the Space Force, of course, efforts to get that created. We have the QAnon intel operation that is out there that's giving us bit by bit, piece by piece information as to what's going on behind the scenes. So yeah, I'm pretty excited to see what they built and get my hands on one of those flying scooters or
The
black,
hoverboards?
anti-gravity black triangles, right?
I want a hoverboard, but I don't want the Channing Tatum rollerblades from Jupiter's End.
This is Jordan Sather reporting live from low Earth orbit.
That'd be awesome.
Right? Edge of wonder at the edge of the atmosphere.
So that
See, guys, it's not flat.
well, actually, you know, leading into all of this, this is kind of interesting because this is what the flat earths argue, right? It's like, well, we don't have this technology. Blah, blah,
Space
blah, blah.
is fake, NASA's fake, everything we hear from NASA is false, and the Earth is flat.
Do you wonder?
But this is what the military would be for, right? Always being way ahead of the public domain. So even since I was younger, I had a family member who was in the military, you know, and just my understanding was always that the military was always 30 years ahead of whatever the public is. Now it's probably like 1,000 years ahead.
Well,
you know?
you can see that with GPSs, right? So GPSs just started becoming popular in mid 2000s or something like that?
Yeah, it was late 90s, early 2000s.
You guys got GPSs on your wrists.
Yeah, we do.
And you talk to people in the military though, and they were using GPSs like way back in the day. That's how they were getting around in deserts and stuff like that. And none of that information was spread to the public. And those are on satellites, by the way. And you can't have satellites if the Earth is flat.
Just look up at the moon.
We have
round.
satellites.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see that sort of information, you know. Or another good example is energy technologies.
Yes.
We're still using fossil fuels, and we got space shuttles that still need rocket fuel to get up into the atmosphere. And yet you look at it like a cell phone, how fast did a cell phone come out? And now we've got iPhones with touch screens, and I mean, just 10 years ago it was like flip phones with buttons that could hardly get a signal.
And the design is still the same rocket design from the 1960s.
Well,
Ridiculous.
Even airplanes, right? I mean,
Still using Bernoulli's principle.
Using the same I mean, because I remember seeing in the 80s, like, you know, they came out with the Concorde in the 70s or whatever, and it's like, oh, in the future airplanes coming into the 2000s will look like this, and they're more kind of like these spacecraft looking things, but yet we're still flying in the exact same planes that my grandparents flew in, you know, when planes first came out. There's like no difference except the seats are smaller.
There is no industry that ever says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Totally.
None.
So just
they're always developing. And why are airplanes, cars, why is this so ridiculous? Like,
and yet we have quantum computers now that compute in other dimensions.
But I don't have a hoverboard, and I'm pissed.
Totally. Every single time I fill up my car with gasoline, I'm just like,
where's my magnets?
So it's just observing, just using logical deduction of the situation. It's like, there's stuff out there that we're not getting. And what happens is they only let out the bits and pieces of technology and sciences that they can utilize to control us with or make a buck with, you know? So in the black projects, like you just mentioned, they could be 30, 40, you know, 100 years ahead, who knows, you know, this project, this program, they could all have wondrous stuff, but they only leak out little bits of what they discover if they can utilize it to make money and control, and it's not going to let the public advance really as to a point where they're going to lose control. So they're very tactical with what they bring out, but luckily with the internet and whistleblowers and testimony and things like that, and the internet's ability for us to share it all around, the secret space program is not so secret anymore. You know, so
I don't know if this is a stupid question or not, but like, what is the relationship between secret space programs and, for instance, like the military-industrial complex?
Right. So the military-industrial complex is sort of an umbrella term. Let's talk about city-states. Right. You've got the Vatican is a city-state in Rome. It's not, you know, it's its own like country basically within Rome. It's not actually incorporated into Italy.
Kind of like DC or something.
Exactly. DC is another one, and the city of London.
Yes.
These three areas are all city-states within their respective nations, and they all have obelisks, wonderful enough. So we have all these three areas, essentially Vatican, London, and DC. Vatican is the deep state's religious control arm. The London is their financial center, and they use Washington, DC, basically America, as their military arm. Right. So for a century now, the deep state has used America as their military pawn to expand their empire around the world. I mean, we've been at war basically perpetually, forever. So that's the idea of the military-industrial complex. It's this umbrella term that essentially you have the military and these corporations, these defense contractors working with it, that they just build ungodly amounts of equipment, and then like we were just talking about, they charge so much money for the equipment to take the rest of the money, and the military is used as pawns. Now, you know, the military is not all bad. Most people in the military, they don't realize what they're being used as, and there's a lot of good people in the military that are waking up to it, they're figuring out the truth, and they're trying to get it out.
General Flynn.
Yeah, totally. And it, you know, there's definitely some bad individuals in the military too, the rogue intelligence agencies, the CIA, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm not going to cough on that one. I was going to mention a name, and I was like, I'm not going to do that. There's a few I could mention, though.
Demonetized, censored, terminated. So, yeah, the military-industrial complex is just like another term for the deep state, I guess you could say. It's just kind of talking about more so the military industry corporations that work with it. So, in that military-industrial complex, it's just umbrellas out. There's so much more.
And there are efforts from the military-industrial complex actually going into space and stuff like that too, right? I mean,
absolutely.
They do try to control a lot of things in space. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Totally. So this kind of gets into the discussion of the technologies. Okay, so we've talked about how much money is going into these projects, who's it controlled by, why it's so secret, but let's expand that reference frame and talk about, okay, what is possible. So back in the early 1900s, the first half of the 20th century, we had Nikola Tesla, who's of course working on wireless electricity transmission and even delving into alternative theories of gravity and things like that. We had so many more people aside from Tesla. We had Thomas Townsend Brown, who was doing experiments making large metal discs levitate with just electricity, high voltage, static electricity, levitating big discs. His research ended up in the military-industrial complex. Same with Tesla's. Funny thing about Nikola Tesla, though, you guys know who was tasked to take his papers?
We do.
We do?
Yes.
You guys ever said it on your channel?
Yeah, we have.
Oh.
John G. Trump.
Yeah, Donald Trump's uncle.
Yeah, and because the interesting thing is that he went to J.P. Morgan first, right? Tesla did, to get funding from him. But when J.P. Morgan found out that Tesla wanted to give it for free, basically,
Yeah.
it's like, I don't really want money from this. This is like something that we can all benefit. J.P. Morgan pulled out, so his only option was go to John G. Trump.
All the banking interests, and John G. Trump was tasked by the FBI to go into his apartment and find his papers when Tesla died.
Right.
And,
Which, by the way, I live right next to that building, the
Really?
New Yorker. And
Yeah.
when we do our Tesla episode, if you want to come over, and we're going to rent the room out and do it from the room that he lived in.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm not joking at
Yeah.
Oh wow, totally.
Yeah, so we'll
I would
have to
make a
do
trip across the country just to do that for that.
No, we will.
Absolutely.
We'll
Let me know.
You guys will definitely do that for sure. We've been wanting to do this for a while. So, and actually, when I saw you present the whole thing with Tesla, that was my idea. I was like, dude, we should get Jordan. We'll go to Tesla's actual hotel room and we'll do an episode on
We should
Tesla.
see how close we could get to Montauk.
Oh, we can go out
You
tomorrow. We can
can
drive out to
actually,
Montauk.
you can actually
Sweet.
see the building.
So when
you can.
We'll do an episode on that. We'll do a bunch of episodes.
Yeah, we can either take a train trip, or I can drive us out to Montauk and we can just chill there for a couple of days or whatever.
We could take like a week and do different
New York,
Montauk
the
one, a
entire
Tesla
area,
episode.
Yeah, we could
have
do all
fun.
of it. That'd be awesome. So,
Anyway,
yeah, let's go.
so we have Nikola Tesla, we have T. Townsend Brown, we had Victor Schauberger. He was an Austrian engineer who was essentially forced to work for the Nazis, and what he was doing was finding out how rotation of electricity induces countergravity. So Victor Schauberger had a device called the repulsine, and this repulsine was a vortexing water into a small, basically funneling it. So it started out with a large vortex and went down into a smaller point. In a vortex, when you get into a smaller rotation, you speed up. Interesting. So the water actually would speed up. And Victor Schauberger was finding how vortexing water in very specific sacred geometrical ratios, angles, would be able to induce counter-gravity. So the Nazis got wind of what he was doing, and of course. And so those are just a few names of many others who were getting these sorts of sciences, technologies, and understandings. And this was back in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. So that technology, then going into the black projects, whoever was in control of these black projects back in the 50s and 60s, were like, wow, okay, this is what's possible. We don't want to tell the public because we want to make a lot of money with gasoline and power lines. So,
Exactly.
but of course, with these individuals and their sociopathic minds, psychopathic minds, they're going to build it out, They get access to that sort of science. They're like, let's see what we can do with it.
Stay tuned for more from The Edge.
Well, and also you combine what you were just saying about Tesla and all those guys with the Roslyn crash and different ways of them hiding technology that we're finding from different crashes going on.
Totally.
And now you have a big technology soup there going
Right.
on.
So there's multiple ways. I mean, there was Earth-based scientists like Tesla and Schauberger that were getting this technology. There was crashes that occurred, Roswell in '47. The Battle of LA incident over Long Beach in 1942 or 43. So there was multiple crashes that went down, and they found the crashes and took them into their black projects and tried reverse engineering them. So there's reverse engineered craft, there's Earth-based individuals, there's, you could get into some people who maybe have channeled this information, like Maria Orsic for the Vril Society in Germany.
Yeah, I know who that
So
is.
there's multiple ways that they were
Yeah.
getting this information. So that all went right into these secret projects.
Yeah, and
And-
well, to kind of backtrack with Maria, she the Germans had her, and she was like this really intuitive psychic medium.
She was working in the, it was before World War II. It was in the 1920s.
1920s.
20s and 30s. She actually had a group of girls. It was
That's right.
Maria Orsic
Yeah.
working for her Vril Society, and she was channeling this information, almost like Tesla was.
Yeah,
You know, Tesla
yeah.
said it's not me. I'm downloading this information from some sort of source. Maria Orsic was doing the same thing, and I'm not sure, but Maria Orsic and Tesla might have had some sort of small communication with
Yes,
each other.
I think they did actually.
Yeah,
And
maybe
you-
some written letters or something like that.
And you had a great quote from Tesla during your speech, which we'll show here, and as you're presenting this and whatnot. But now I can't remember.
It was about basically that what Tesla was saying was that all of his information comes from the divine, essentially, right? And that he
He's
was
just a conduit for it.
Yes. Yeah.
And that, we all have that sort of ability. So Maria Orsic in particular, she was channeling this information that she claimed came from a non-terrestrial race, specifically a race coming from the system of Aldebaran, that star, and they were wanting to give humanity information on how to basically build craft for space travel. And when you get into the science of 0-point propulsion systems, it's the same thing as 0-point energy, free energy. So they go hand in hand. So essentially these beings or this race wanted to give us a step, help us evolve more. So it was for peaceful purposes. The Vril Society was doing their channelings, and Orsic was, but of course the Nazis caught wind of that, and much like they caught wind of Schauberger's research, they were trying to
just
get
grabbed everything.
they could, and they forced Maria to work with the Tool Society and the Order of the Black Sun and more of those
Yes.
dark occult secret
Yeah.
societies in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to note was that she was really trying to do everything on peace, but that it wasn't like she agreed to be with the Nazis.
Yeah.
They just really forced her.
I believe from reading Dr. Michael Sala's great research that Hitler and the Nazis came to some sort of a pact with Maria Orsic and the Vril Society, and they said, you can continue what you're doing and we won't bother you, but we're essentially gonna get your research. And it was like
that's rough.
like she was submitted into doing it for them.
So speaking of Dr. Michael Sala, we just interviewed Dr. Michael Sala, and he just had this whole thing about Tesla. But what he was saying, he had these radio waves that was communicating with another ET race, and that was the real reason why he was being shut down, was that he actually made contact, and JP Morgan and all of them freaked out and was trying to shut all of this down.
Interesting.
And then that's how kind of like John G. Trump kind of became a little bit more interested in connecting with
So you
Tesla.
gotta wonder, if Donald Trump's uncle had access to these papers,
Exactly.
what got passed down the family line,
Exactly.
what do they know, and also when it comes to this Space Force, in my opinion, what the Space Force is for is that all these black projects who are in the hands of secret societies and the current administration,
Space Nazis.
Space Nazis. The current administration, they can't get access to that. They can't get into control over these projects. So I think the Space Force is being created as a way to not only gain access and authority over these programs, but then start disclosing them to the public. And this kind of goes back onto that technology conversation we were just having. Back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, there was all sorts of ways that this military-industrial complex was getting this science and technologies. But then into the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even all the way up to today, then they started developing it, right? And the testimony from William Tompkins comes to mind here. He was working for a secret think tank back in the 1950s and 60s for Douglas Aircraft Company in Southern California. And he was literally designing spacecraft carriers, essentially, for the Navy back in the 50s. And it was
This is all in Above Majestic, if you haven't watched.
Sean Above Majestic, and I've interviewed William Tompkins. An interview with him is on my channel, and there's all sorts of great interviews of him out there on other radio shows and channels as well. But Tompkins is, if we had a program being designed in the 50s and then put into operations, it's said, in the 1970s or 80s. They called this program Solar Warden. And we're talking anti-gravity electrogravitic spacecraft carriers that are a kilometer long, basically the size of an aircraft carrier on the sea, but using electrogravitic drives out in space. And William Tompkins isn't the only one who has evidence and testimony of this. You can look into the hacker Gary McKinnon. Back in the year 2000, Gary McKinnon hacked into NASA computers because he was interested in finding free energy and UFO research. He believed the government was covering it up. So he actually, I think he was living at his mom's house in the UK at the time, literally, but hacked into NASA. And according to Gary McKinnon's testimony, he saw spreadsheets that said non-terrestrial officers. It had one of the spreadsheets I believe he saw said fleet-to-fleet transfers, and then had a list of like 9 or 10 ships that didn't say USS but said USSS, as if there was an extra S that designated space in there.
Interesting.
And
wow.
The non-terrestrial officers, it had like Colonel this, Lieutenant Commander this, something this, and then there were even photographs that he was trying to download, but of course it was the year 2000. The speeds back then were hardly anything, so it was like a very grainy image that was getting a little clearer as it was downloading. But while he was hacking, they found somebody was hacking in and they cut his service out. And then I believe about 6 months later, he gets a knock at his door from the feds in the UK that said, "You need to come with us." And his story, Gary McKinnon's story, actually hit mainstream headlines.
It did.
There was a band member of Pink Floyd, believe it or not, who did a charity song for Gary McKinnon. And Gary McKinnon's name was mentioned in the Parliament in England there.
Wow.
So it's, you know, this sort of stuff is, they call it the biggest hack of all time. Now, of course, maybe that was said a few years ago. We've had pretty large hacks these days, but
Also, it wouldn't take 6 months for the feds to start knocking at the
right
door.
now they would know exactly where you are.
I
So
mean, we probably wouldn't be feds either.
yeah, black suits from somewhere.
We have taken you to the edge. Please watch your step.
So we have multiple accounts of just this one program called Solar Warden back in the 1970s and 80s. Then we have photographic, testimonial, all sorts of evidence about black triangles called the TR-3B that were in existence back in the 70s and 80s. Some say that those were owned and operated by the Air Force, maybe the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO. So I would imagine there's multiple secret space programs, plural, maybe the Navy or the CIA or the Air Force, or, you know, quasi, like we were mentioning earlier, quasi-corporate military groups, Lockheed, Boeing, TRW, in concert with these governmental organizations, all working on these secret spacecraft, working on psychic technologies as well, consciousness-assisted technologies, remote viewing, all sorts of stuff, like literally,
Cerebro.
yeah, Star Trek type realities.
Yeah.
And funny enough, you know, again, Dr. Michael Sala dug this up and reported about it in one of his books, but according to Sala's research, the creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, actually had contact with, I believe it was Leslie Stevens' dad, who was an admiral in the Navy.
Interesting.
So, and this was back in the 70s, so could it have been that Leslie Stevens got information from those around him, was slipping it to Gene Roddenberry to make Star Trek, to start disclosing these things, or, you know, telling the public? So it's, I think for decades there's been kind of this shadow war for disclosure, and now of course that war is getting out into the public domain. It's getting hot. We've got Q, we've got, you know,
And now you know the story of Spock.
yeah.
Actually, one of the things I wanted to mention, that's one of the things that blew me away most in the above majestic film, got to check that out if you haven't,
It's really good.
is when they were describing the similarities of making a craft that could exist in the ocean is more similar to space than trying to make a craft that can exist in our air here, because the same qualities that you'd need to exist in the ocean are the exact qualities that you'd need to actually fly through space. So those submarines that they were building are actually the same type of craft at the beginning that was actually going out into space. And now it would really make sense that the Navy was the one, you know, actually partly involved in some of those projects that were actually producing these craft that would go out there. I thought that just like totally blew me away, because it makes so much sense.
Exactly. And there's a couple things to be said about that. Number one, when you think of a submarine, what do we call it? Individuals that are trained to work on that submarine, they're trained to be in an enclosed area for months at a time. Submarine going under the ocean, so they're trained to do that. And not only that, but a submarine is of course airtight. So according to the evidence we have, it's actually been said that when these black projects first started getting their hands on these technologies back in the 40s and 50s, and they wanted to test them, they actually retrofitted a submarine with these electrogravitic drives and sent a submarine into space. And that was the first craft, the first platform that made it into space was a submarine. And not just that, but when you're thinking of using electricity to counteract gravity, you're doing so in the etheric medium in the source field, essentially, which is a fluid field that's everywhere. It's kind of like water, you know? It's kind of like water's a fluid medium that when you're in it, it's everywhere around you. So these electrogravitic drives that essentially create this bubble in space-time around this craft, whether it's a triangle or a flying saucer, or some of these craft are cigar-shaped. The reason they have to be this shape is because they're working in a fluid, the fluid of the ether, you know? So it's even the way not just the individuals are trained to be on the craft, but how the craft moves in that fluid is very similar. So, you know, you often hear the stories about USOs, unidentified submerged objects. Then we have UFOs, unidentified flying objects. And
well, and I mean, one of the biggest bases is supposed to be outside of California there, right? Or near Mexico, where there's like an underground area, and that's...
I think you can Google Maps that one.
Yeah.
Google Earth that one.
You can see that one.
Yeah. It's like this massive shelf, and then it looks like there's pillars and this entrance
Right.
Not just underground, but under the continental shelf out in the ocean that goes underground. So who knows how real that one is, but there's testimony that we have from military officers back in the 1960s that essentially said that deep underground military bases, DUMBs are being created around the country. But not just that, we have DUMBs that could be out in the continental shelves that are classified. So there's been stories for a long time about these sorts of stuff existing. So I wouldn't doubt if there are secret bases out under the water that not just normal submarines can get into, but who knows what they keep there.
Very, very interesting.
You know, they keep a lot of these craft, a lot of these secret spacecraft underground. I often say, where does all this missing money go? Way up high and way down below. And it's tough for people to think, well, how do they fit these spacecraft underground? You know, would they need some giant opening to fly? But when you're talking about the physics, the actual sciences of how these craft operate, they literally dematerialize and they can rematerialize elsewhere. So they don't need to fly through anything. It's not linear space they're moving through. They can be in the upper atmosphere, dematerialize, and then just bloop, point to point, pop up underground.
Yeah, those are just coordinates if you know what you're doing. Right?
Yeah, so it's essentially like a coordinate. And even when they're traveling planet to planet, all they need is the resonance or the frequency of that specific planet. They use their little computer systems to type in essentially that like IP address. It's like an IP address.
Yeah.
They go from the IP of Earth to the IP of Mars, point to point. You know?
We've heard that for quite a while, actually, that kind of technology that really exists. I know for probably some people it might be hard to
grasp,
but
in, you know, at the very beginning of this conversation we had, that's kind of why I mentioned like the awakening process isn't a one and done thing. Like back in 2012, 13, 14, before I had heard of the secret space program, I was into UFOs. I was into free energy. You know, I believed in this, I was researching it, but my perceptions, it just wasn't expanded enough to comprehend a secret space program and a lot of this stuff. Then in 2015-16, we had some whistleblowers come out. We had a lot more information hitting the public domain about secret space programs. It was like, just whoa, you know? Then you can see the big picture a little more clearly, and just as you keep going through a lot of this information, it starts to make a lot more sense. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of people in the public domain, they're like, how do these craft, where do these craft go? Where are they hidden? How are they built? Where does the money go? But there's so many pieces that they're out there. You know, this information is out there, you can find it, but of course the educational media authorities that we go to, they don't put the dots together for you. Sure. So it's up to us, and well, it's up to the viewer, the people, the researchers out there, the people who are curious to take it upon themselves to inform themselves. But it's also very helpful for us as citizen journalists to utilize social media to put information out there and help with that.
If the last 40 minutes left you wanting more, then don't miss part 2 with JSather, and we'll discuss some of the mind-bending physics of our electric universe. On the edge of wonder. Truly wondrous.
It's full of stars.
Sir, don't put that one on YouTube there, but... Hey guys!